What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my updated edition of my personal top 25. This is the week 13 version, guys. There are only 2 weeks left in the regular season this 2024-2025 college football year, and we are getting down to the nitty-gritty. Lots of changes, especially towards the bottom of my rankings, and let's just go ahead and dive on into it. Before we do that, you guys know I got to say thank you for all the love and support this channel has received and will continue to receive, because you guys do an excellent job of that, whether that's simply just sitting down, open up a snack and a beverage watching this video, or if you want to do more things like subscribing, ringing the bell, which you especially should do if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am, or liking, commenting, sharing, and anything else you do to interact with the channel. I do really appreciate all of it. And if you want to go support me elsewise, go give me a follow on Twitter or X, whatever you prefer to call it, at Tailgate829. Start, hopefully soon, posting more about what I do outside of YouTube in the sports media realm. And again, I would really appreciate a follow over there. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive on in to my updated top 25. And as per usual, I do have some honorable mentions, but it's not that many this week. Kansas State did fall out of the poll because of the loss to the Arizona State Sun Devils, and you'll figure out where Arizona State is in my poll a little bit later, but Kansas State's one of the very first teams out. Missouri is there as well. That was actually a really hard-fought game against South Carolina. But for the most part this year, I just haven't been impressed with Missouri. That last performance against South Carolina, yeah, I mean, I'm going to give Missouri their flowers there. They played really well. Brady Cook looked to be back. Luther Burden, that connection was working really, really well. But a couple disastrous plays for Missouri, and then, of course, Rocket Sanders finishing things off ended the game for the Missouri Tigers, and that has ended up how South Carolina won that game. Illinois and Syracuse, couple teams that wear the orange and blue. Those two teams, for me, are also pretty darn close to breaking on into the top 25. Illinois sitting at 7-3. I believe Syracuse is also sitting at 7-3. Yes, they are. I mean, you could maybe put a couple other group of 5 teams on here as well, but to me, there really is no one else close to these 4 teams, which is why these are the only 4 you see in the honorable mention list. But okay, these 4 teams did not make my top 25. So then who is above them? Well, even though they lost last week to a team that they honestly should have beat, again, I'll give New Mexico their flowers. That's been a really well-coached team this year, and the jump that they've been able to take under Bronco Mendenhall has been really, really good. Washington State, though, I feel like is a team that, to me, I think they're more deserving of a top 25 right now than Kansas State. I think they're more deserving of a top 25 spot right now than Missouri, than Syracuse, than Illinois, and then any of the other Power 4 or Group of 5 teams that you want to throw out there. John Mateer has still been fantastic, and I'm not going to fault Washington State too much for that loss this past week. Now, yes, could they have won the game? Yeah. Absolutely. Defense, did they play up to standard? No, not necessarily. 534 yards of total offense allowed is not that great, and the offense wasn't even that great there on third down. But, I mean, you got to give New Mexico credit. They played a clean football game, no turnovers, very few penalties. I think only 4 or 5 penalties in that game. But Washington State's offense did their job. They actually outgained New Mexico. New Mexico just made the extra plays, the 1 or 2 extra plays they needed to win that game. Washington State still, to me, deserving of a top 25 spot, but they are going to be the last team in the field at 25 at number 25, and that a whole bunch of teams that were not ranked for me last week, especially in the group of 5 realm, that I would like to welcome to their first Tailgate Nate top 25 poll this year. And we got a couple out of the American Athletic. The Memphis Tigers are the first one that I'm going to talk about, as they are the next one up at number 24. Now, Memphis has had a couple performances this year that have been pretty disappointing, but overall, you take a look at the resume for Memphis. Again, the UTSA game is the one I'm really going to point out there as saying, yeah, that one was pretty disappointing. And I think they were even pretty disappointing against Navy too, because both of those games, well, you felt like you could have won both of them. We could be talking about a Memphis team sitting here at 11-0, rivaling Boise State and Army to try to go into the college football playoff. But those hopes for Memphis, I do not think are going to happen because the American Athletic Championship game has already been set. But Memphis with Seth Hennigan, a lot of the other weapons they have have still been a good football team this season. UNLV is right there at number 23, widely considered, and it's also factually correct, in my opinion, to be the second best team in the Mountain West Conference, right behind the Boise State Broncos. You take a look at how they were able to push Boise State in that game, and you take a look at what they've done the rest of the year. The loss to Syracuse, you don't really fault that because you look at how Syracuse has been so far this season. They've been pretty darn good, and Kyle McCord went off that game. But, I mean, they've beaten two Power 4 teams on the road. They beat Kansas, who have just pulled off two straight upsets against ranked teams. They went on the road and beat Houston. They went toe-to-toe with Syracuse at home. They slaughtered Fresno State. They could have had their chances to beat Boise State in that game. They just beat San Diego State this past week, and now they get a road test against San Jose State this week, a game that I think will be very interesting to watch there as well. Welcome Iowa State back to my rankings. Iowa State was one of those teams, kind of like Pitt, kind of like Navy, that started out 7-0, started out really, really good this year, widely considered to be in the college football playoff conversation, but then they just sort of had a fall off. And sometimes when you start out undefeated and you start out really, really hot, and then you see that first loss come across that record bar, it can be very deflating and it can turn downhill very, very quickly. However, when you take a look at what Iowa State was able to do last week, they beat a pretty darn good Cincinnati team. That's a Cincinnati team right now that sits at 5-5, but a Cincinnati team that I believe, yes, they have Kansas State and TCU for their final two games. I mean, easily, I think you could win one of those two, and Cincinnati could wind up in a bowl game. And Iowa State beat, again, a very good, very competitive Cincinnati team this year. They were able to handle them with some ease. And I mean, overall, what they've done this year has been very, very impressive. That game against Iowa on the road, you still look back at that one and say, wow, that was impressive on the road against West Virginia. That was impressive. The game against Iowa, probably their best win. And if you take a look at Iowa State, I mean, they're going to get a chance to play Kansas State here, so they'll get a chance to cement themselves in the top 25 again as well. But 8-2 this year. Matt Campbell's got himself a squad, and Iowa State's at 22. And then Tulane is in the rankings for the first time this year. They have locked in a spot in the American Athletic Conference Championship game, where they will play the Army Black Knights. Tulane has also been a pretty solid group this year. They've actually been one of the better teams in the group of 5 realm. They only got one game left. They're going to be playing Memphis, a battle of 9-2 teams. But again, you take a look at Tulane. I mean, their only 2 losses are against Power 4 competition. They lost at home to Kansas State, a game that they also felt like they could have won. If you remember, there was some officiating and some calls, but save that for another video. And then on the road against Oklahoma, the Sooners were just able to kind of handle them. But Tulane even made that one competitive and close. Sooner defense and special teams kind of took over late. But Tulane has gone on the road, and they've beaten probably what's going to finish as the best team in the Sun Belt in the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. I think a lot of people are overlooking that game. They beat a really good South Florida team. They hung 71 on UAB. On the road to beat North Texas is not easy. And then they just shut out Navy this past week. Again, undefeated in conference play, deserving of a spot in the American Athletic Championship game, and we'll see if they can win it, possibly push for a spot in the college football playoff. We'll go a lot faster through the rest of the top 25 because it's teams you've seen before. Arizona State, man, they just continue to win, they continue to impress, and they continue to elevate themselves above preseason expectations under Kenny Dillingham this year. And I love what Arizona State has been able to do this year. They just pulled off a massive win against Kansas State. That's a huge win for that program. Probably going to find themselves within the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings. And now they get a home game against BYU. BYU team coming off an upset loss. It was their first loss. Again, you've seen the case with a lot of other teams this year that start out undefeated. Iowa State, Pitt, and others. Once they lose that first game, it sort of starts to go in a downward sort of direction. Arizona State's favored against BYU right now, and I don't blame the odds makers because I would be too, and there will be a preview prediction video out for that one there as well. But I mean, Arizona State has had a couple of amazing performers this year, especially Cam Scattaboo, that running back that I talked about last week. South Carolina also up 4 spots with Arizona State. They're the number 19. Rocket Sanders finishing that game off against the Missouri Tigers. And South Carolina, again, they had been close in a ton of games this year. Then they upset Texas A&M, and they finally started to find their rhythm. It was not easy to go through and beat the Missouri Tigers, but they were able to do it. Good on South Carolina. They're in the top 20 at number 19. I have simply flipped Army and Colorado and kept Clemson where they are. And it's just because I feel like Colorado is a team that, especially now, might be one of, if not the front runner to get out of the Big 12 conference and get into the college football playoff. Colorado's looked really good this year, and the thing that I've been impressed with the most is, yeah, you can be impressed with Shedeur Sanders. Yeah, you can be impressed with Travis Hunter, and Travis Hunter probably going to be in New York at the Heisman Trophy ceremony, more likely than not. But the thing that has to impress you the most about Colorado, in my opinion, is the way that they have been able to flip the narrative and how they have played the line of scrimmage. The defense is finally being able to get some quarterback pressure. They've done it all year long now. Is the offensive line perfect? No, but if you compare it to what it was last year, man, is it a whole hell of a lot better. And you got to give credit where credit is due. Dion and Colorado, they're in position to go make a run at making the college football playoff. Army still undefeated. Don't have anything bad to say about them, although they do got a tough one this week. Yeah, they got to play the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and you'll hear what I have to say about Notre Dame later on in this video. But we'll see if Army can stay undefeated this week. And then again, Clemson escapes on the road against Pitt. Cade Klubnik able to seal the deal. I believe a 50-plus yard rushing touchdown for the quarterback. Clemson, again, apart from that game against Louisville and Georgia, they've been able to find their stride this year. And now with conference play wrapped up for them, all the pressure in the world is on Miami to finish, because if Miami loses one more game down the line, I know they have Syracuse to end the season in the Dome, and that's going to be really, really tough for them. But Clemson, and they got a game with South Carolina coming up there as well. If they can win that one, that's going to be a resume padding win. Might be inside the committee's top 15. And if Miami falters again, Clemson's got a shot to make the college football playoff as the ACC champ, and we'll leave it at that with the Clemson Tigers. Moving on here into the top 15, guys, 15 is where I got BYU, and I've mentioned this before on my channel, but I'll now mention it in my top 25 video. Miami, a team that you see at number 12 right now, has been the team all season long that has sort of been the mentality and the embodiment of survive and advance. Miami has had a ton of close games, a ton of close goals, but for the more often than not, except for that game against Georgia Tech a couple of weekends ago, they've been able to pull out the wins. BYU kind of had to start to do that, right? They had to do that against Oklahoma State. They had to do that against Utah, and they had to, but they couldn't do it against the Kansas Jayhawks. And I mean, you run into a team in Kansas that's coming off of an upset. They're starting to find their stride. They are a team that's not as bad as their record says they are. They've lost a lot of close one-possession games this season. You felt like the loss was imminent with this BYU Cougars team, and well, it came last week at the hands of the Kansas Jayhawks, who again have been on an upset tear and can do it again when they play Colorado this week. The Buffaloes do have to watch out for that one. You take a look at what happened in this past meeting against Kansas, and I mean, BYU's offense, they were able to move the ball pretty well. I mean, 354 yards is nothing to knock your head at, and I mean, they held Kansas to only 242 yards of total offense, including 2.2 yards on the ground. So, Nate, what happened? Did penalties get in the way? No, but there was actually not a lot of flags in that game at all. I think BYU and Kansas both only got penalized 4 or 5 times combined. I think there are only 2 or 3 penalties for each team. BYU even controlled time of possession. They had the ball for 31 minutes. It's just they couldn't capitalize. And Kansas was able to make the better of their opportunities, and Kansas won the turnover battle 2-1. That's what killed BYU in that contest. And right now, BYU, man, you got to go on the road to play Arizona State, a Kenny Dillingham team that has been absolutely phenomenal so far this season. Things are getting really scary for people in Cougarland who thought that, this is a team that was a shoo-in to make the college football playoff. Now they might have to, again, they're going to have to play, not necessarily spoiler, they're going to have to try to survive, man. That game on the road in Tempe, not going to be fun for them. That's going to be a very hard game to win, and what I think is actually going to be a very, very fun environment to watch. But we'll move on from BYU, and we will have a preview prediction video for their game against Arizona State up later at some point this week. Texas A&M is sitting right here at number 14. I decided to bump them above the BYU Cougars because, I mean, Texas A&M, you take a look at the SEC race right now, and yes, there are a lot of 2-loss teams that are absolutely, still in contention to make the SEC championship game, and obviously still in the field of play for the college football playoff. And we'll look at those 2-loss SEC teams here in just a little bit. A&M is also a two-loss SEC team, but you take a look at who their two lost their two. I mean, yeah, the South Carolina loss doesn't look as good as probably some of the other teams that they could have lost to, but it still is not a bad loss in my opinion at all. Sure, they could have made it a little bit more competitive, but then the other game that they lost is the game against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in week 1 of the season. Texas A&M has been a team that's been really good this year, and hey, if they can survive an upset against Auburn and they take care of business against Texas at home, they're going to be in the SEC championship game, and they're going to be playing for a spot to go to the college football playoff. Texas A&M is still in this conversation. Do not forget about that team. Texas A&M still in prime position to go make a run at the college football playoff. Boise State is still that group of 5 front runner. They were in some trouble early in the game against San Jose State, but Ashton Jeanty was able to make them survive. Apologies for whatever appeared down below me. We got rid of it, but yeah. Ashton Jeanty was able to once again put the team on his back, another 3 rushing touchdowns, and he probably is going to end up breaking 2,000 yards next week. And there would still be one, if not 2 games to go because of the Mountain West Championship game, at least for Ashton Jeanty in a Boise State Bronco uniform, and likely if they win out those games. San Jose State was their biggest test left before they move on and play in the conference championship game, because you go on the road to play Wyoming. The Cowboys have not been impressive this year. And then you get a game against Oregon State at home, and a game that you should easily win there as well. Now, when you take a look at the Mountain West standings, the team that actually is sitting really close to Boise State is Colorado State, and I don't think they pose as big of a threat as UNLV. I don't think they pose as big of a threat as San Jose State. Do I think Colorado State's still a good team? Yeah, but I do think that UNLV would provide a bigger threat to BYU in a not BYU, to Boise State in a conference championship game scenario. UNLV doesn't play Colorado State, so there's still some things to work out there, but basically what you need to know about Boise State is Ashton Jeanty is phenomenal, and as long as Boise State doesn't lose, I mean, the only loss on their resume is going to come to either the Big Ten champ or runner-up, more likely than not, in the Oregon Ducks. Miami and SMU were 2 ACC teams that sit inside the top 12 at 11 and 12 specifically. Miami, again, been the embodiment of survive and advance. How many times have I said it on this channel? I mean, A, because it's true, but Miami couldn't survive against Georgia Tech, and now that Clemson has finished conference play, all the pressure in the world is on Miami to deliver, is on them to perform, because if they win out, I believe, for the most part, and to my knowledge goes, they win the tiebreakers over Clemson, and they get into the ACC championship game. Clemson has done everything that they can do. If Miami wins out, they get in to likely play the SMU Mustangs. Now, SMU kind of had to embody that survive and advance mentality last week, because they did get quite a scare against the Boston College Golden Eagles. Thomas Castellanos was really, really good in that game, but SMU was able to survive. And they're getting another interesting test this week because they go on the road to play Virginia, and that's a Virginia team that already has a road win over Pitt this year, couple other really nice wins, and it's not a team that you can sleep on. They were supposed to be a better team this year. They have been a better team this year, and I do think they're going to be able to challenge SMU, and then SMU's also got Cal to round out the schedule, another team that you can't really sleep on. So if SMU can survive, then you're going to see them in the ACC championship game, and right now is my highest ranked team in the ACC. But into the top 10, this is where you see a ton, in fact, all of the college football playoff contending 2-loss SEC teams. And in the middle of that, you get an undefeated Big Ten team that I know probably feels like they're getting disrespected by me right now, but it's simply because I think Alabama is a better football team than Indiana. I think Georgia is a better football team than what Indiana is right now. Indiana's best win, it's also rewarding Alabama and Georgia for the schedule they have played. Indiana's best win right now is what? Nebraska, Michigan. To be fair, and again, strength of schedule is something that you look at because, again, you have to play the schedule you're given, and you should reward teams that do better over a tougher schedule. Now, again, Indiana is absolutely deserving of at very least the top 10 ranking, and they're probably still going to be sitting at number 5 in the College Football Playoff Committee rankings. Do I have a big problem with it? I mean, no, not necessarily, not really, because it could definitely work itself out this weekend when Ohio State and Indiana have to play each other. But you take a look at all of these teams, you could even argue Ole Miss is better than Indiana, and on a good day, I think I would agree with you with that. Tennessee, same thing. Ole Miss has got the bad loss to Kentucky, so that's why they are below that. Tennessee's got a road loss to an Arkansas team that, again, is not bad at all, even though they're sitting at 5-5, but they have losses to unranked teams. And I know Alabama's got the loss to Vandy. What do you mean? Well, Bama's got the win over Georgia. Bama's got the dominating win on the road against LSU. Georgia, again, kept that game close with Bama. And yes, they have the loss to Ole Miss, but they just got that win over Tennessee, where they started to look like themselves again. Now, I hear a lot of people saying Tennessee is out of the running for the college football playoff. Ole Miss, Georgia, and Bama are going to be leading those conversation. While I still agree, Bama, especially because of the tiebreaker scenario, they're going to have the tie-breaking win if there were to be a ton of two-loss conference teams, of teams that have two-loss in conference play, that Alabama would win that tiebreaker because of the head-to-head conference record thing and the whole ordeal that I explained in another video up on my channel, and I might even go back to that in another video as we take a look at conference races here as we get closer to the end of the college football season. But Bama's in firm control. Texas and Texas A&M are in firm control, but Georgia, Ole Miss, and Tennessee are all still alive for the college football playoff. Why do you ask that? Well, what if Notre Dame loses another game this year? They, again, should be able to win out, but they got two pretty tough ones. They're going to have to play an undefeated Army team that's got a lot of momentum right now, and then they have to go on the road to play USC. And, I mean, the Trojans looked pretty solid last week against the Nebraska Cornhuskers and absolutely could be a trap game for Notre Dame. If they win out, they're going to get in the college football playoff, and one of these SEC teams is going to go by the wayside and probably out of the college football playoff race. Or maybe it's the Indiana Hoosiers. Who knows? It probably depends on that result in Columbus quite a bit. But, I mean, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, all four of them are still absolutely alive to make the college football playoff, and I think it's ridiculous to say that one, if not multiple of them, are out of the college football playoff race. They're all sitting in my top 10. They're all probably going to be sitting with inside the committee's top 10 as well. You got Indiana right there in the middle. If they beat Ohio State in Columbus, I mean, egg on my face. Indiana will probably end up being a top 2 team. But for right now, I mean, again, granted to Indiana, every team that they have played at the time of playing them has had a winning record, or at the very least a 500 record. Now, again, those teams definitely are sorting themselves out now. Charlotte has really struggled this year, and a couple other teams that Indiana has played so far this year. But, I mean, man, it all rides on that game in Columbus, which I'll talk about more in a video coming out more likely than not on Wednesday. And again, we'll talk about it more when we get there. But I told you guys in my weekly takeaway video, Notre Dame would be inside my top 5. They're sitting right here at number 5 because my top 4 didn't change. Oregon, they had to embody the survive and advance mentality you need to have in November college football. They got past a really tough test against the Wisconsin Badgers. I don't think Ohio State brought their best this past week, but still they were able to easily get by Northwestern in Wrigley Field. Texas definitely did not bring their best this week. The defense stepped up and made some huge plays as the Texas offense came out flat yet again, and that's going to be a problem in the college football playoff, but they survived, they advanced, they got the win, and they move on here and stay there at number 3. And Penn State played a bad Purdue team that they were supposed to slaughter, but I don't even think Penn State brought their best because their leading rusher, again, was Tyler Warren, and that's a problem for Penn State. They don't have the speed on the outside. They don't have the elite wide receiver that Drew Aller needs, and Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, they didn't lead the team in rushing in that game against Purdue. Now, I know their carries were limited. They played some of their third, fourth stringers because it's Purdue. They were going to slaughter them. But again, all those teams, I really don't think any of the top 4 teams brought their best this past week. Oregon definitely didn't. Ohio State definitely didn't. It's kind of hard to tell that. The same thing with Penn State. Texas definitely didn't, and you can tell that by that score. But I want to talk about Notre Dame for just a little bit. If you didn't watch my weekly takeaway video, A, I highly suggest you go watch it. But B, y'all got to stop sleeping on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And honestly, I don't want to hear any more about this NIU loss. Yes, it is probably the worst loss that any college football playoff contending team has on their resume. That is absolutely factual, and it cannot be denied. But you take a look at what Notre Dame has done since that loss to Northern Illinois. They've been absolutely tremendous, and they got some opportunities here to get even more wins on their resume. You even look at the game before Northern Illinois. They went on the road in a tough SEC environment and held Texas A&M to 13 points. Granted, first week of the year, trying to figure stuff out, but that's going to look great on the resume, especially if Texas A&M beats Texas and goes on to play in Arlington or not Arlington, my apologies, in Atlanta in the SEC championship game. You take a look at what they did afterwards. Slaughtered Purdue, slaughtered Miami, Ohio, ranked win against Louisville, and the Cardinals made that thing closer than it should have been late. Slaughtered Stanford, slaughtered Georgia Tech on the road, slaughtered a ranked team at the time in Navy in a neutral site, slaughtered Florida State, and special teams and defense took over last week to slaughter Virginia. It wouldn't surprise me if they absolutely went out and killed Army this week and then killed USC the next week after, because I think Marcus Freeman's squad is playing some really good football right now, and the defense is stepping up and playing well. Riley Leonard's arm and legs are being as effective as one another. He's really found that balance as the season has gone along, and I know the NIU loss looks bad, but every team this year has had at least one game where they haven't looked their best, or one loss that you look at and say, that's a very questionable loss. The NIU loss, yes, very questionable. You could say the same thing about Ole Miss. That loss to Kentucky, questionable. You can maybe say the same thing about Tennessee on the road against Arkansas. Probably not to the extent that, Notre Dame losing to NIU and Ole Miss losing to Kentucky, and some of the other losses we've seen throughout the nation this year as well. Kansas State going on the road and losing to Houston, kind of a loss that makes you go, what the heck? But this is a Notre Dame team that I truly do believe in, and I think if they play really well and the way that they're playing right now, I do think they can make a run in the college football playoff. That is just simply my opinion of the way I see Notre Dame right now. But again, Penn State, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, no doubt in my mind, those are the best 4 teams in the country right now. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind these are the best 5 teams in the country right now. You could argue Indiana, you could argue Bama, you could argue Georgia, but again, Indiana, we'll find out a lot about them when they play Ohio State this week. Oregon's going to be on bye. Texas has got Kentucky this week. I'm not sure who Penn State has got, but actually, Penn State might have an interesting test because I think they're on the road. Yes, they're on the road against Minnesota. Interesting one there for the Penn State and Nittany Lions. And then again, Notre Dame's got the showdown with Army later on this week as well. But guys, that's going to do it for my top 25 video. Let me know any changes you make, anything you would add, any teams that you think I missed out on, or just feel free to list your own top 25 in the comment section down below. But hey, that's going to do it for this one. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. We'll see you tomorrow with some updated college football playoff predictions. Possibly that could also come out on Wednesday, but I will also try my best to do a rankings reaction at the end of the ranking show tomorrow. Goodbye.